categories, but is trying to not change the amounts of the land on this property guided for those categories. So of the total roughly 23, 24 acres, you're seeing just under 18 acres at present are village medium density residential, and just under 7 are commercial. As proposed, you'll see just over 16 remaining village medium density residential and 7 acres as commercial. The Planning Commission discussed one of the sort of unique things about this site is the location of the commercial lot to the west of the property. That's located there due to the soil conditions on site. The developer and their engineer reviewed the site in terms of the geotechnical conditions and determined that area of VMDR between the commercial lots was best suited for a stormwater pond. Okay, so the next slide here is about the rezoning request, and again, the site is currently zoned rural transition. As you're aware, in the city of Lake Elmo, that zoning district serves as sort of a kind of a holding district, so to say, until development is proposed on property, at which time it's rezoned with a zoning district according to the guidance in the comp plan. That is what the developer is proposing here by changing the site from rural transition to a mix of VMDR and commercial. And those, those zoning districts would align with the proposed guidance in the comp plan that the developer is proposing to change. So a little bit more about the site layout. The development will have public streets and sidewalks throughout. There will be shared ponding with irrigation reuse systems from those stormwater ponds. There are 4 commercial lots. They're numbered on the screen to help us kind of talk about them. 1 and 2, moving from west to east, those are proposed future uses as office. Office uses. Lot 3, which is in the southeast corner, is proposed as the bank, which would be Bridgewater Bank, and then 4 is a retail lot. The land uses proposed here are all approved or permitted by right in the zoning district that is proposed, which is commercial. So the residential outlots would be those on the north side of the site, and you can see those, if I can get the cursor to show up. So the cursor is hovering over the western outlot and then sort of that northeastern outlot. Those would be developed at some point in the future. They would have to develop to the density in the comp plan, which is 3 to 8 units per acre. So on the screen, you can see the master plan, so to say, for this development, and you can see how the developer envisions meeting the density requirements, specifically on the residential outlots. So this is a really busy slide. This is our zoning and bulk standards review. What we really need to be aware of is those top 2 rows that are shaded in black. Those are the standards the developer must meet at this time through the preliminary plat process. The minimum lot area and width for commercial properties. Notably, the lots that are proposed do meet those standards. The rest of the standards in this table, they're things that the developer should have a good idea of, whether they meet or don't. And it appears that as proposed, the developer is showing us these sites can meet the city standards for setbacks, impervious, etc. One of the things that I did note, there is one standard that didn't appear to meet, which is a parking setback from residential on lot 1. That is something that can be addressed through the development process. It appears the developer could fix that issue on that lot. So I'm just going to run through these lots relatively quickly just to give you an idea of what's proposed. Again, commercial lot is proposed as an office. So this is the lot that had the parking setback issue, and that's on this northern property boundary. This site appears to be overparked, so it does appear that the developer can revise the boundary of the parking lot. The design standards for these lots will be reviewed at the time they are developed, so we don't have any proposals at this time for the development of this lot or the build out of this lot, but landscaping, parking, design of the building, and signage, those types of things will be reviewed at that time when a building permit's filed. Okay, lot 2 is is pretty similar. Again, those standards will be reviewed at the time of proposal. Lot 3, this is the bank lot. Bridgewater Bank is proposing to construct a bank at this location. We don't yet have a site plan submittal from the bank, but the developer is showing us what we would expect to see in terms of how the site's laid out. They have requested a conditional use permit for the drive-through that's associated with the bank. We can tell that there are 6 criteria. We can tell that the development will likely meet 1, 2, 3, and 6, and it will have the ability to also meet 4 and 5, but we just don't have that information at this time. So the recommended conditions, should the council approve this conditional use permit request, will require that the drive-through is consistent with the city's criteria for those features. The other condition that we're recommending is some enhanced landscaping on the southwest or southeast corner of this lot to help screen that drive-through from the intersection of Stillwater Boulevard and Manning. Okay, and then commercial lot 4, this is proposed as that retail use. Again, those standards are to be reviewed at a later date. So in looking at the actual plans for the preliminary plat, we've of course talked about land use and lot sizes and area. The city also reviewed for landscaping, grading, stormwater and wetland impacts, public infrastructure, which includes streets, access and utilities, and parkland dedication. Just to hammer this point home, no flexibility is being requested by the developer at this time to zoning or subdivision requirements. So up on the screen, this is the preliminary plat, just for the record, that was submitted with this project. So jumping into the landscaping review, the site has been reviewed by the city's landscape architect for conformance with the city's standards. There are really 2 standards that they're reviewing against at this point in time, which are street frontage trees and disturbance area trees. We're seeing general consistency with the city's requirements, but the landscape architect has required some revised plans to make sure that the development meets all of the standards in code. So a conditional approval is recommended. Parkland dedication, because this is a mix of residential and commercial, this is a 10% requirement for this property. Developments that have such uses do create a demand on the park system, so land is required in terms of dedication or cash in lieu, and that is what is suggested for this property given that it's not in a park search area. So staff have had the ability to review, including the city engineer, landscape architect as mentioned, the fire chief, and other agencies. The city engineer has also provided a memo which has a number of revisions that are required to the plans to ensure that they meet the city standards. I talked about the landscape architect. The fire chief also had conditions of approval suggested, fairly typical conditions. And then lastly, other agencies have had the ability to review. This includes Washington County, the Valley Branch Watershed District, and the Met Council. One, I did want to note the Valley Branch Watershed District, we're working to make sure that we understand the requirements for the watershed so that we can know if the plat does or doesn't need to change. And so we've been sensitive to their comments and have made sure we include suggested conditions to ensure this development meets those. So up on the screen, you'll see we've got 4 different proposals here, and so we've worked our recommended conditions accordingly. We've got one required or recommended condition for the comp plan amendment, which is that the Met Council approves it. For the rezone, that would be contingent upon the approval by the Met Council of the comp plan amendment in addition to the preliminary plat approval. We've got 20 conditions proposed for the preliminary plat. I won't go into all of those. Most of them are standard. Some of them are specific to the site, like I've discussed. And lastly, we've got a conditional use permit for that drive-through facility. We've recommended 5 conditions, notably making sure the landscaping is acceptable, meeting those drive-through facility criteria, and lastly, that required permits are received by the applicant. So those are the recommended conditions. Happy to go into those if you have any questions. The Planning Commission reviewed this item at their meeting on October 23rd. They did hold a public hearing at that meeting. I would note too that no comments have been received prior to, during, or after the Planning Commission public hearing. The Planning Commission did make a unanimous recommendation to the City Council supporting these 4 requests. So I do have some recommended motions. I would note too, the developer is here this evening and happy to talk about the development if you have questions for him. So I'm happy to stand if you have any questions for me.
Council questions?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Couple questions. So I see stormwater reuse is talked about a couple times in terms of overall how it's working, that shall meet city requirements. Was the plan that it would be for both the commercial and the residential?
Yeah, I think that's a good question for the developer. My understanding is the stormwater reuse system will cover both properties because the stormwater system is designed to accommodate the impervious surface on not only the commercial, but also the residential property.
If that is not the case, I would like to hear
Yep.
from others, but I'll presume it is. I see in our documents that it meets our requirements for trail purposes, and in the county feedback, there was a couple of comments of, it would be nice to do this. Can you speak to the difference as to what the county is asking to have happen versus what is already in place? Where's that gap?
Yeah, so I know that the trails were reviewed during the sketch plan process specifically where the city staff kind of went through the development and ensured that trails were provided. I would note that the city is looking to require trails along, if I can get the cursor to show, Stillwater Way
Oh.
to make this connection east to west. And then there is an existing trail corridor along the Manning Avenue area, but then again, requiring a trail along Stillwater Boulevard up to the point where we get to the lot 1, that commercial lot 1. My understanding is that the county may have been looking for a continuous connection, but because of the land uses west of this property, it doesn't seem likely that a trail corridor will be there for a long time.
So in our conditions of approval, do we have that covered? Because I was looking in terms of the county's feedback, because currently it says that it meets our requirements. But I just want to make sure that we're incorporating the county's ask, especially for the northwest part to connect out to Manning.
Sure. If the city engineer has any comments, I'd defer to him as well.
We are meeting, we've worked with the county when we came up with our plan, and the conditions that I have in for the trails are,
All right.
will meet that. It also includes a connection to the Holiday Trail going beyond, and also a pedestrian crossing of Stillwater Way to connect to Little Blue Stem Trail as well.
Good. Thank you.
Councilmember Hearn?
So I'll preface this with, I was trying to watch the commission meetings and struggling to get those to work. I reached out to a commissioner, had a little bit of input, but as far as with that discussion, or I guess I'm wondering, was there any discussion about the premature subdivision with the commission at all? And if so, get a kind of a recap on that.
Yep, that is a fair question, council member. So there was not a conversation about premature subdivisions at the planning commission meeting. I will be, straightforward that I kind of view that as sort of a council policy decision. But there were no questions from the planning commission about premature subdivisions at the meeting.
Okay, and then just maybe one follow-up, was there any discussion about the water concerns? by the commission?
The commission did not discuss water. They had at a previous meeting, they had received an update from staff, which I presume answered some of their questions. But as it relates to this development, there was no conversation about water issues.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Beckstrom?
Thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember Hearn. I too made multiple attempts to watch the Planning Commission meetings and was not successful.
Talk to the cable commission tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, yes, please do.
Yeah.
And so I was also concerned or wondering what the conversation was around the premature development, particularly around water, knowing that the Planning Commission was quite vocal a couple meetings ago about how council was not paying attention to the water issues. And so I was hoping that maybe in that meeting they would bring up and discuss what they would do But unfortunately, it looks like they just unanimously approved this without having that conversation, which is a little concerning. My question is, I'm assuming this will be connecting to city water?
That is correct.
Correct.
This will be connected to city water and sewer.
And what is, in the comp plan, I was trying to find what's the phasing in our comp plan for this particular land area?
This particular land area is in the correct phase of the MUSA growth and phasing plan, which would be the 2020 to 2030
Okay.
phase.
And so, assuming then we're connecting to city water, as of today, are we currently violating our appropriation of water limit?
I will defer to the city administrator on that question, she has a little bit more experience in that area.
Councilmember Beckstrom, for the last, I think this will be our 4th year now that we're in violation of our permit.
So.
Yes, we are currently.
So further developing will push us even further into violating the limits, putting the city at great risk of fine, penalty potentially, unless that gets changed. Is that correct?
Councilmember Beckstrom, that's certainly an option the DNR has the authority to exercise against the city, correct?
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Maybe, yeah, just, so, with the way some of the conversation's going, with some of these, or with some of the questions, with the 4 different motions, I think the main concern, it sounds like, is the water. Are there certain ones that we could move forward with tonight to show that we want to go in that direction without, I know we've gotten in trouble before with the preliminary plat where if we approve that, then that is set in stone and we have to go with that. Are we able to push forward with any of these motions but not others without that issue?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it, Councilmember Hearn. You certainly can if the council wishes, but I'm not sure what you gain by rezoning the property if you're not gonna be letting it
Correct.
develop, right?
Sure.
I mean, at the end of the day, the developer needs all of these things in order to move forward with his project.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that
That-
there
that
would be some
answers it.
advantage to splitting it up, I
Okay,
guess would be my
that
response.
answers it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Council, any other questions? Councilmember Holtz?
Question for staff, as you and I have both met with appointee level members of DNR many times between 3M settlement stuff and elsewhere. Is the DNR aware that we have been in violation of our appropriation for many years?
Councilmember Holtz, yes.
Have they given any indication to the city of Lake Elmo or to any other parties who also are in violation, as there are others, that they have any intention to fine?
Councilmember Holtz, they have not.
Thank you.
Administrator Hand? I have a question. The DNR, there is a penalty of, at this point at least, of what they're indicating, a $40,000 fine for a violation. Is that correct?
Recently passed legislation this past year allows them to fine up to $40,000 as well as come in and levy a tax to solve the solution, if you will.
And if we continue to violate that appropriation, which is based on the lawsuit with Judge Marinan of the White Bear Lake lawsuit, is it possible that by continuing to violate that, we're also violating a court order of the Supreme Court on this issue? And could we be penalized further?
That might be a legal question, I guess, when you're
Yeah,
talking
maybe
about
I should look
quarters,
that
but I would
way.
say anything's possible.
Madam Acting Mayor, members of the council, I mean, certainly that is possible, although I'm not sure how likely, given that, you know, there's the court order for the White Bear Lake, that's a district court order,
Okay.
but not a Supreme Court order.
But it was upheld at the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Thank you. let's see, do we have a motion to, I'm sorry, you still
Just
have
to
a question?
follow up for legal, in that process, as the city was not a party to the suit, do courts have the authority to levy any remedy against someone who is not a party to the suit?
Madam Acting Mayor, members of the council, I don't know if they would have the authority to do that, but obviously the DNR has the authority to levy the fine.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, any other questions? Yeah. Would the developer like to speak? Any concerns?
Well, Mayor, Acting Mayor, members of the council, my name is Matt Alexander with North Shore Development Partners. I represent Bridgewater Bank, who is the owner of the property. Very excited to be part of the community. Really just worked through a lot of basic challenges of any development like this. We've had just a fabulous experience with the staff and just really excited to be a part of it. Regarding the water, we're understanding that obviously the omnibus bill that helped the legislative process, we thought that was a solve, so pressed forward thinking that way. One thing to note, the water usage of the plan before you is just for 4 commercial pads for banks and office buildings, which are quite a bit less water usage than the residential component, which we don't have a user for at this point. Currently, all we really have technically is the bank. And they would, if assuming we were gonna get through this, this month and the comprehensive plan amendment is approved with the Met Council, we would be presenting the bank plans for review with the staff and kind of coming through this winter with the goal of starting construction this spring, so. We did ask for some phasing with the cul-de-sac and change, and we understand that that is a fire code violation, and also some other items that the engineer gave us some feedback on, we're fine with, as far as just to accept the locations of a water main and some trail extensions on the north side as part of phase 1. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. The president CEO of the bank, who's also a Lake Elmo resident, really wanted to be here, but he's out of town for business, so.
Questions, council?
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, probably for Christina. He had indicated that the commercial piece of this development will start, and it will be some time before that residential. In passage of this tonight, can it or can it not be split as far as water usage? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, so, and Nathan can help me if my memory is wrong, but I believe what they're doing is platting the commercial stuff and the residential's an outlot, so they'd have to come back and replat that when there's time? When it's time to do that? Is that?
Acting Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. So they will, what's being proposed this evening is the preliminary plat. So of course, what would follow this request is, upon approval by the Met Council of the comp plan amendment, a final plat to basically finalize the details of the development. That final plat would be only for, as the developer mentioned, the 4 commercial lots, creating outlots for the residential use, which would then come back before you in the future with a final plat.
Oh, with a final plat, so not a preliminary plat in the future.
Correct, there would
So
be
you would be
one
giving them-
preliminary plat for the development, and then the final plat for the residential use would be to.
But passage of the preliminary plat gives them permission to move forward anywhere within that development.
Yeah, it's an approval of the general lots and
Lots,
land uses.
Including the residential and commercial.
Correct, so the preliminary plat would basically establish those residential outlots, the shape of them. So when the developer comes back in, they'll final plat
Must have their-
basically chunk of residential land into, it could look like the same, and then they'll have some, assortment of residential uses thereon, so.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. Can you pull those motions up again, please?
Yep.
And Madam Acting
Yes.
Mayor, Just a reminder that the comp plan amendment requires 4 votes.
Okay, do we have a motion to move forward? I'll move it forward for discussion. Move to adopt Resolution 2023-111, approving the comprehensive plan amendment request for Bridgewater Village with the findings and conditions therein. And this is for discussion.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Discussion.
Discussion? You want to start? Go ahead.
Sure. I feel like we're at a point as a council where we have to make a really hard decision about development because of the situation we're in with water. We want development, we do. We want to grow, but we find ourselves in this position with our water appropriation, with the contamination, with the need for new infrastructure, for, you name it. I mean, we're in a quandary. And it doesn't seem like we're getting help that's solving this. And I think until we make a tough decision and get the attention of others to say they really do need some help with their water issues, what can we do? We're going to continue in this place of frustration in being able to move forward with water, with development. The other piece of that is we get beat up by the community online for development, development that past councils have done. It comes up often that we need to stop developing because we don't have the water for the residents we have in our city now. And as a council, I feel like it's our responsibility to make this tough decision and say, we simply cannot continue to develop until we have a solution to the water issues that we're facing. They are that significant. And so for me, I just simply ethically cannot move forward with development. I can't support this at this time until we have resolution on our appropriation issues.
Councilmember Lawrence.
I don't disagree with anything that Councilmember Beckstrom mentioned. The frustration I have is we, as a council, as a city, through staff, made substantial efforts to get a legislative solution, and we thought we had it, and the DNR didn't implement the specifics of the law that was put in place. And we've made that crystal clear to them, and nothing is moving on this. And I think Councilmember Beckstrom is right. I fully support this, and I don't inherently have an issue with our being consistent of being above our appropriation. Because the DNR, I truly believe, has zero actual interest in ever levying a fine against us. The issue is if the court were to order the DNR to do so. That's my concern, and I believe Councilmember McGinn was alluding to that. So with that being the case, I fully want to support this, but I can't. And it's not, business development helps the city. It expands the tax base. This is good for the city, and because of a couple millionaire owners on White Bear Lake, we can't do what is good for our city. And that is absurd, it is abhorrent, and someone far above our level needs to fix it, because it can't be this way. It cannot. I hope to God someone reports on it.
Nothing to add.
Well,
That hits it.
yeah, I will add to that, Councilmember Holtz is right. Many of us have spent several hours, many times, meeting with the legislators. We've spent time at the Capitol. We have spent time at mediation. We've spent time in court. And Lake Elmo is essentially being ignored. What they're saying is that our PFAS issues, our contamination issues are separate from these appropriations of water. It's very clear, Lake Elmo has water. There are water in those aquifers. We are being told we cannot use that water. We are the most strict city in the state for irrigation. And we are being told that, well, maybe you need to go to a brown city. Maybe you need to have no irrigation for any of your residential users that are on city water. And yet they aren't concerned enough to even look at private wells and measure those. So it's astounding to have a judge stand there and say, Lake Elmo, I understand you guys are in a vice. You have the White Bear Lake lawsuit here saying we need White Bear Lake to stay at a number that is recreational, not environmental issue, it's a recreational issue. And yet, yes, we understand you have contamination throughout your city, your wells are contaminated, and yet say, yeah, I understand you're in a vice, and you might have to look at discontinuing development. And when DNR was approached at increasing our appropriation for water, understanding that we have developers waiting, and we have residents that use their yards. I live in a mostly senior area, and they use those yards every day to meet with neighbors. People have hundreds of thousands of dollars in their homes and in their businesses, and the amount of damage that us going to a brown city would cause is, in my opinion, similar to equity stripping. So they acknowledge we've got issues of having to bring neighborhoods on because of the PFAS issues, but we can't bring those neighborhoods on because they're saying we can't have the water to do it, or we cannot continue to develop because they will not give us an appropriation higher than what it is today. And when we talked about a regional approach to this, even the judge early on was considerate of that, and DNR has flat out said, no, every single city will be at these numbers. And we can't meet those numbers today. And I can't go back next summer and tell our residents that, oh, by the way, now that we have the most strict irrigation in the state, as far as I know now, that you're not even going to get that because we can't provide water to new residents, new commercial, and when we're not even supplying enough for our own residents now. So this is a very nice development. This has nothing to do with this development. And I appreciate the fact that you're here, and I don't think anybody here tonight or the mayor is taking any of this easy. But I would implore that those people who are most affected, those landowners that are going to want to develop their land, then somebody needs to step in. And the problem with this is that the legislature, even though they tried very hard, they gave us options. We are currently waiting a continuance for one court that we're still trying to find out about appropriation. We won't know that probably. It's scheduled now to be in December. And if we get through that hearing in December, the judge will have another 30 days beyond that to make decisions. So we may have some answers. February, maybe the city administrator can speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, Councilmember McGinn, as it stands now, so we were supposed to be in trial last month, and unfortunately, due to some illnesses, that got pushed to December. And then my understanding, as you said, is the judge has 30 days to rule on that. This is the administrative law judge.
Can you explain a little bit more about what that hearing will help us with?
So in 2018, the city filed an appeal against the 4 conditions placed on its permit because of White Bear Lake. A condition requiring us to plan for a contingency plan for partial or full conversion to surface water use, a residential irrigation ban if the lake gets below 923.5, and limiting our water usage to 75 gallons per capita per day or 90 gallons overall to include businesses and schools and whatnot. And then the fourth one was a condition requiring us to report annually about collaborative efforts in our region to reduce water usage. That is before an administrative law judge, so a little bit different than district court, where we've appealed that. And like I said, that will be starting up again in December.
Thank you. So this evening, I'll call for a vote on this comprehensive plan amendment.
So I just wanted to note for the council, for your consideration, we have plenty of time in the 120-day review process. We're not even past 60 days. So the council has some time, as I noted in the staff report. There are options for the council to move forward on this, not obviously just to approve, but also to deny, or potentially we can talk about other solutions based on listening to you throughout this conversation. So I would just reiterate the suggestion in the staff report is we have some extra time. If you want to provide guidance to staff, potentially, if you want to see, resolutions for a denial, I think we would strongly recommend that we bring those back in front of you. If you want to table this item to a future meeting, that would also be acceptable, especially given that we have plenty of time in the review period for this. So we don't have to make any final decisions tonight. If you feel like more time would help, I think that is certainly a good consideration. And I'm not sure if the developer has any thoughts or comments on that timeline as well, but I just wanted to mention that to the council.
Matt, would you like to speak?
Based on what I've heard, and I appreciate everybody's concern, because it is a precedent-setting kind of moment in time. So we would like to table our application at this point and come back after some staff dialogue, perhaps some ideas of ways to thread this so that it makes you feel more comfortable, rather than go through and be denied at this point, if that's acceptable to you guys.
In light of a wing and a prayer possibility with administrative law judge, I mean, the 120-day would extend after, so that's in December, and there's
60
30.
days is up later this month, so I think that gets us to, another 60 days gets us to middle towards end of January. So it would be close.
So there's a potential, but obviously, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a wing and a prayer, but
Madam Acting Mayor, members of the
Yeah.
council, there is we have 60 days and then we have an automatic additional 60 days that we can take. On top of that, we can ask the developer for their consent to extend it
Extend
further.
beyond that.
Yeah. And, you don't have to do that now either. I mean, you could bring it back to a future meeting.
So just table it to a future meeting.
I rescind my second for the motion,
Or you could just, a motion to table is higher
Yeah.
if somebody wants to make that motion.
Go ahead.
but otherwise we'd have to vote on the plan first before we table.
A motion to table is higher than
Okay,
motion to approve.
motion to table all four of the motions
I'll second.
to a date as discussed recently.
Any question, concern? Administrator Hand, do you want a date at this point, or just leave it open?
I would prefer to just leave it open within the 120 days, but, we'll either plan to bring it back within the 120 days or get a further extension from the developer if he's willing. So I think it would be best if council didn't specify a date to give us that flexibility.
Okay. So all those in favor of tabling this issue until further within the 120 days, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no nays, we'll have this tabled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to number 21, the solar farm ordinance zoning text amendment, ordinance 2023-20, and Resolution 2023-105.
Thank you. Again, the ordinance under review tonight is the city solar farm ordinance. City Council asked staff to bring forward for review the city's current solar farm standards due to concerns solar farms may have on rural character and visibility from adjacent properties. Staff compiled a review of the city's current solar farm performance standards in comparison to surrounding cities, those being Hugo, Scandia, and Cottage Grove, and presented those for discussion at the September 12th City Council workshop. In summary, that workshop, City Council came to the consensus that a modified version of Hugo setbacks and a modified version of Scandia screening requirements were preferred amendments to our current ordinance. Staff compiled a proposed text amendment based on the City Council feedback and presented that to the Planning Commission at their October 11th meeting. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the proposed amendment with an amendment to strike the proposed Section 4 related to screening requirements. The Planning Commission felt that the screening requirements were excessively strict, they were in conflict with current screening requirements, and the Planning Commission felt that the landscape and screening requirements amended earlier this year would provide sufficient screening for this use. Also, during the Planning Commission meeting, no public comment was received on the proposed amendment. So with that, we can move into the language changes. So the language underlined in green is added new language. The language shown with a strike through in red text is removed language. The first change is to Table 9-1, outlining or correcting the solar farm performance standard reference. 1440 references ag sales business, whereas 1470 is the correct solar farm performance code section. Moving on to 105.12.1470, which is the meat of this amendment. Staff is recommending striking setbacks and screen requirement language from Section 2. This would be broken out into its own independent subsections. So then we would be recommending the creation of subsection 3, setbacks, which would be requiring solar farm equipment to be at least 150 feet away from adjacent or from property lines and road right-of-ways measured from the exterior edges of the solar equipment. Again, that is a modified version of Hugo setbacks, so we are now going from a 50-foot setback to a 150-foot setback. And then we would be creating subsection 4 of the screening requirements. So again, these would be in addition to 105.12.480, the current landscape and screening standards, with 4 additional items specifically for solar farms. The first, subsection A, is requiring a vegetative buffer of 20 feet in width and 6 feet in height. Section B and C are outlining when screening needs to be achieved. So for screening from road right-of-way, that would be met at the time of planting, whereas screening from the adjacent residential dwellings and public water bodies would be within 6 growing seasons. So the reason that B and C are separated is solar farms would have a larger viewshed impact and affect a larger population from roads due to the higher trip count, rather than neighbors and water bodies due to the large lots and spread out nature of rural districts. And then Section D would be creating a mitigation if C is not met, where within 6 growing seasons or after 6 growing seasons, if screening is not achieved, then mature plantings would need to be replaced. So then with that, I have 2 possible motions and then a summary publication. The first option is amending the ordinance as presented by city staff, which would be everything that we just went through. The second option would be going and approving the amendment as amended by Planning Commission, which is the same language except for Section 4. So you have the option of those 2, otherwise you can further amend it, and then summary publication after that.
Questions? Councilmember Beckstrom.
Can you speak to the Planning Commission's concern with number 4?
They felt they were excessively strict, verging on the lines of zoning out green energy. Some of them were fairly supportive of solar farms and wanted to promote them rather than restrict them and hide them from view.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Holtz?
In light of our successful ability to view that meeting, was that widespread, isolated, or was it pretty consistent across the commission?
The vote was, I think it was 6-0 of striking section 4. So they were all in agreement.
So did our planning commission, again, we were unable to view this planning commission meeting either. And I did reach out, but was unable to get in contact. I understand that there's some concerns that, I think council and the planning commission worked really diligently and very hard over the last year to look at screening. And if I remember correctly, we're specifically talking about the rural areas of our city. So did they talk about rural, the impact of this on rural farms that versus the more urban areas in the south end of our city? I mean, the expectation of, we don't have a lot of development up in that area.
That was mentioned, that these rural areas have far fewer neighbors than the urban areas, but they still voted to recommend denial of section 4.
Any further questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to adopt ordinance 2023-20, amending section 105.12.620, table 9-1, and section 105.12.1470, solar farms as presented by city staff.
I'll second.
Discussion?
I'll start.
Go ahead,
Sorry, I'll start out.
Councilmember.
I think I understand the idea of keeping consistent with the screening. I think that makes sense typically. I think the fact that these are two very different zones, I think it makes it reasonable to have two different variations of what we'd want for screening. In the more rural setting, I think you're not expecting these types of views when you're closer to commercial. Although it may be unfortunate, it should be expected that there are going to be buildings and there's going to be other things, and that's why we have the screening ordinances in place for this. I think with the rural, I think having this separate set of screening regulations is going to be helpful for the neighbors. I think that is the way to go. I feel like that's the way we were moving at the workshop, and I can understand the Planning Commission's desire to keep it consistent, but I think it's reasonable to have two different variations for this.
Councilmember Holtz?
I was going to offer thanks to staff and the Planning Commission for this process. It's been a long process, and to me, this is a clarification, a good improvement. Obviously, we know the underlying reason why we're looking into this, and it's a process improvement. With that said, I am intrigued about that 9-0 vote on removing it, and I don't disagree with Councilmember Hearn on this, and I'm hesitant to. I understand where they're coming from, and in light of the fact that it's now 150-foot setback, the screening that we have actually becomes even more powerful when you do have that 150-foot setback and the clarification as to the view shed and how we're looking at it. So I'll wait to hear other comments.
Sorry, just one quick clarifying question. Was one thing that was changed, did we say 150 feet from both the adjacent properties and right-of-way? Or when we had the workshop, were we only asking for the 150 from right-of-way, but less from my discussion with one of the commissioners, that's kind of what we were discussing, but I couldn't remember.
I believe we split the difference of Hugo modified. So Hugo had a 100-foot setback from property lines and then 200 feet from the road right-of-way. So we split the difference there and made it apply to
All the way
both.
around. Got it, thank you.
And I would just like to mention that there was a lot of work done on this, and as my memory serves me, we attempted to look at, could you pull up the cities again? We attempted to look at what other cities have done and find a reasonable answer to what we would need to do in Lake Elmo to protect that rural atmosphere, if you will, yet be open to the solar farming. And I know my intent at that point was to try and find some flexibility and find something that I felt was reasonable within all those cities and how they handled this. So we were in the middle of it. It wasn't, council didn't choose something that was way off base from any of these other cities, but we wanted to also make sure that we were meeting our rural areas. Any other?
I think maybe just one other thing to add too is, all these cities, I could be wrong, it appears that they have specific screening and landscaping requirements for solar farms. Again, I could be wrong, maybe these are theirs as well for just general.
Only
No.
for solar.
Okay, and it is such a different use in such a different area that to me, it makes sense to have different screening requirements.
And I'd just like to make it clear that, I have great respect for the time and that our planning commission members have put into this. Oftentimes, once it goes to the planning commission, things change, even in our development. Things come before council that may not have been before the planning commission or are a result of what our planning commissioners asked or felt was important. So with that, I'm going to ask the question.
Call the question.
Call the question? Same difference to me. The mayor will be back next week. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Ask for-
All those opposed?
All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay. We have 3 ayes and 1 nay.
So just a reminder, summary publication will take 4 votes. For your next, the next.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it to come up.
Move to adopt summary of publication of ordinance 2023-20 with approval of resolution 2023-105.
Second?
Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Hearing no nays, the ordinance publication 2023-20 with the approval of resolution 2023-105 passes. And that concludes our regular council session this evening. Council reports?
I was going to offer a thank you to staff for helping with Election Day yesterday. Got to use the old fire station one more time. There was a line, there were many people helping to volunteer, and for those who help to do that on Election Day, that is a tremendous benefit to the community. And it's great to see people come out to volunteer and to actually be able to have it be a successful process. And to Julie and others who helped to make it happen, thank you for that. And I don't know if you're going to mention it, Administrator Hand, but I'm hoping to hear just a status report as to how the meetings are going in light of the bond being approved, where we are at.
With respect to the school,
Yes.
the new proposed Lake Elmo Elementary concept plan will be before the city council next Tuesday
Thank you.
In a workshop,
in the workshop, yep.
no report. Councilmember Bedstrom?
The only thing I'd like to bring up is I think we've heard really clearly tonight from all council members, there's an issue with the streaming on our website of past meetings. And so I don't know if it's recommending it go to a workshop, that maybe we need to look at our technology, our streaming, availability of meetings, but it simply is not acceptable for none of us up here to be able to access past meetings in a timely way, to understand the dialogue, but also it's absolutely unacceptable for our residents to not be able to access meetings and keep in touch with what's happening with city. So I feel like we need to do something about that.
Councilmember Hearn?
No report.
Administrator Hant?
No report.
Julie?
I just would like to echo what Councilmember Holst said. Thank the election judges and fellow staff members who helped out on Election Day. It was our last hurrah at the fire station, so voters can be expecting to see some notices in the mail when we do identify which polling places we'll be using going forward. That's not 100% settled yet, but we will be making some changes with that regard. Everything went very, very smoothly. We had 25% approximately voter turnout in person, which is very high for a school district-only election. So folks here were very engaged.
No updates. No report.
Sophia? No report?
No report.
Okay, anything else?
Nothing for me tonight.
Just real quick, I do remind the council, I do have a neighborhood meetings for the 2024 street improvement project tomorrow night. So I'll be meeting with the Jamica Court property owners at 4 o'clock in a virtual meeting, and the Carriage Station neighborhood at 5 o'clock in a virtual meeting. The Zoom links are available on the project page on the city website.
Thank you. Chief?
No report from fire.
Sarah?
No report.
Okay, with that, we're going to close this session of the city council. We're adjourned.
It was such a light little tap.